Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Commemorative Public Forum. My name is Mary Bowling, and I'm an educator with the Michigan Sea Grant Program at Michigan State University Extension. We're very pleased to be providing the technical support for today's webinar. In addition to myself, Cindy and Caitlin are here behind the scenes helping to make today's webinar possible, so thank you for that. We encourage you to type your questions into the question and answer box located at the bottom of your screen as we move along through the various panels. There'll be plenty of opportunity for questions and answers, so please use that Q&A box at the bottom to put the questions there. So today we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. It's an agreement between the United States and Canada. And it's an important because it provides a framework for identifying binational priorities and implementing actions that improve our water quality. The priority that I'm most familiar with is the Areas of Concern program, because I've been working for about the last 20 years on cleaning up the Detroit River Area of Concern. The Detroit River Area of Concern is a binational waterway that separates the metropolitan areas of Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. Cleanup efforts in the Detroit River and other areas of concern throughout the Great Lakes owe their beginnings to this Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which is why Tom Leonard from the Great Lakes Creative Hub approached us about providing technical support to his program, and we eagerly agreed. So thank you, Tom. Tom's been hard at work planning today's program, and so I'd like to open it up to Tom and have you introduce yourself and our first guest.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to welcome everyone to the official public opening of the Great Lakes Creative Hub and its webinar to pay tribute to one of the most significant international agreements in history. Today's event owes special thanks again to Mary Bowling with Michigan Sea Grant for making today's webinar possible. My passion for the Great Lakes began when I was a boy and has continued for more than 3 decades, involvement in the development of educational programming, focus on understanding the Great Lakes. 10 years ago, I worked with Christine Mannanen, Great Lakes Commission, to promote an arch across the waters. And we developed a creative writing project with Columbia College to develop a shipwriting adventure program. And a lot of that was successful. Unfortunately, there wasn't the policymakers that recognized the need for cultural connections. But I believe the ongoing COVID pandemic has changed things. It's kind of nearly cut off all personal contacts between our peoples for a number of years. And despite this, with the fortuitous arrival of Zoom technology and a few clicks of the mouse, people from across the lakes can now meet anywhere at any time. Thankfully, in the spring of 2021, Michael Johnson, the community engagement manager with Arts Midwest, responded to my call and helped facilitate several Zoom gatherings with a variety of leaders. We soon became aware of efforts of Todd Fleet, a cultural dynamo in Northern Ontario, whose efforts in the Greater Sioux area have brought together artists and the academic community in furthering festive programming that connects young people to their local heritage with a particular emphasis on the Indigenous communities. Now, globally, cultural initiatives have emphasized the appreciation of one's sense of place as a prerequisite for building strong and sustainable communities. Our initiative recognizes the importance of replacing the concept of a rust belt to that of a vibrant and culturally rich and interconnected ecosystem. We envision a broad, basin-wide cultural mandate, one that allows creatives of varying stripes with the exuberance of artists to exchange ideas while also being dedicated to conducting fun and enlightening educational activities that bring you to our waters. I want to start the meeting, though, with an invocation with Lisa Dinami from the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. If you'd like to, please go ahead.
So what I said was my name. I'm Lisa Dinami, and I'm from the Keweenaw Bay Indian community. And my prayer was a blessing to all of you for what you are doing here today. And I gave thanks for the work that you're doing and for all things to go well with you as you engage in this activity that you're doing today. I am a member of the Keweenaw Indian community, and I am also a water walker. And for those of you who are unsure or do not know what a walker water is, we are the women who walk the shores of Lake Superior to make awareness to the people of the beautiful water that we have, and to spread awareness that we are the ones that are the protectors of the water. Women are the water carriers, so it is our job to bring that awareness to other people. I live on the shores of Lake Superior, and I've lived on the shores of the Great Lakes my entire life. I was on the shores of Lake Michigan when I lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I've been on the Keweenaw Bay Indian Reservation the rest of my life, and I live like a mile away from the shores. When my family come to visit me, I always let them know that these waters are the cleanest, the deepest, the coldest, the purest of all 5 Great Lakes. And it's my job to spread that awareness to other people, to let them know that we need to keep it that way. So many moons ago, there was one of our chiefs that spread awareness about the waters. And long ago, he commented that before too long, an ounce of water is going to cost the same amount as an ounce of gold. People are bottling water now. They are, got a price ticket on it. Where I am, I have all the free, clearest water ever. And so that reality is starting to come true. He actually had a dream and a vision that that's what was going to happen to our waters. And so with that, one of the grandmothers in the lodge said, what can we do about it? And that's when she began walking the waters. Grandmother Josephine walked the entirety of all 5 Great Lakes, and then on the shores of both the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. And she's no longer here with us anymore, so it's our job to bring that awareness to the people. Another thing that brings joy to my life that you may not know is that the Keweenaw Bay Indian community was the first tribe in the state of Michigan to receive the authority to set water qualities on the reservation. And so that was like a historical thing for our community to be able to get that achievement and to do the sovereign regulations for the water quality here along the shores of Lake Superior in our reservation nation. Let's see, what else can I say? Oh, I guess maybe probably another thing I think I'd like to share with you is just a little song as a water walker. So when we walk for the water, we sing and we pray for the water. In our culture, we believe that the water has spirit. The water is the lifeblood for Mama Akea, for Mother Earth. And the water is also the lifeblood of our own bodies. And we need to continue to pass that knowledge on to our young children. And so I work in the early childhood field. So them teachings are starting to happen with our young children to let them know that water is a living spirit, and it's our job to help keep it clean and help protect it by not putting, garbage into the water, not throwing litter onto the earth, because what you throw onto the earth will eventually make its way into the water. So we're doing little things like that with our children, and we're taking them on their first, we're gonna start the first children's water walk actually here in May, for a way to start out our spring after our snow is gone, to help instill that into our youngest children. So it'll be children that'll be going on this walk, and they range from 6 weeks old until 5 years old. And the ones that are unable to walk will be pushed into a stroller. And then as we are doing the walk with the children, we'll also teach them a little water song that they can sing with us, because them little changes that are going to happen are going to start with our little people. So I'd just like to I'll share one portion of the song with you, just to, I guess, so I can spread the song to the people who are in view right now. Goes, Nibi wabu aindain Miskwe haki nibi wabu heya 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 hey heya 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 oh. And that song is sung 4 times. And what we're saying here is that the water on Mother Earth is praised, and we give praise to her when we sing the song. And then another thing to always remember too is that every morning when the sun rises, there's a new chance for our hopes and our dreams. And my hope and dreams are to keep the Great Lakes safe, protected for the future generations, because the water is what we need to live. I always tell people too, when I'm doing teachings and talks, is we were the last of all spirits to be put on Mother Earth. The winds came before us, the waters came before us, the sun came before us, the plants and the animals came before us. And we as human beings are the weakest, because we need all of them to survive. They don't need us, but we need them. And so with that, I would just like to say miigwech for allowing me to open for your presentation. And I feel honored that I was able to be here and share a little bit with you all. And with that, chi miigwech, and best of wishes to you all.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We share your hopes and dreams, and it's very true that we don't need other things, but they all, I'm sorry, they don't need us, but we need them.
Exactly.
So very beautiful words. And in the Great Lakes are the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of many Indigenous peoples. So we really appreciate you starting us off with such a special blessing. It is an honor to have you here, and we really appreciate that. So thank you. So once again, everyone, I would like to welcome you to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Commemorative Public Forum that's coordinated by Tom Leonard and Todd Fleet from the Great Lakes Creative Hub, with technical support from MSU Extension Sea Grant Team. MSU Extension programs and materials are open to all without regard to race, color, national origin, gender identity, religion, age, height, weight, disability, political beliefs, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, or veteran status. So in an effort to reach more audiences, we are recording today's forum and will close caption it before posting it online. We'll hear from 2 different panels this afternoon. Our first panel will discuss the legacy of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and visions for the future. Our speakers for that are Cameron Davis and John Jackson. Cameron served as the Great Lakes Czar in the Obama administration and was the lead negotiator for the US EPA and State Department, negotiating the team that worked on the 2012 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement reauthorization. John is a member of the Great Lakes Ecoregion Network and past president of Great Lakes United. So following the remarks from Cameron and John, Dave Dempsey, who's an author and senior advisor for a group called the For Love of Water, or FLOW, will facilitate some questions and answers. So go ahead and take it over, Cameron.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Mary, I really want to thank you and Sea Grant for providing the support. Tom and Todd for everything you're doing to get us together. Dave for facilitating. John, my fellow panelist, who I've known for decades, knows the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement inside and out. And Lisa, miigwech to you. I just thank you so much for your lovely, wonderful, inspiring opening. If you're still there, there's one thing about our new Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that I think a lot of people don't know about, but was really inspired by many of our Native brothers and sisters and advocates around the Great Lakes, and that is the notion of traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, was introduced into the 2012 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. I still think of it as new because I think of it as yesterday, us sitting around the negotiating table with Canada, but it's been 10 years this September since that version of the agreement was signed. What's really interesting about the agreement is that its purpose to help continue to restore and maintain the biological, the physical, the ecological health of the Great Lakes, and the physical health has never really changed much. That is a purpose that has stayed intact over generations. And that says something. That says that pioneers, leaders like John, like Paul Muldoon, like Lee Botts, who was a mentor to me in the early days of trying to articulate why the US and Canada, including First Nations, including tribes, including municipalities, states, provinces, and many other players, needed to constantly coordinate and move towards the North Star of that purpose that I mentioned before. It's important to understand that that purpose hasn't changed a lot. It's been fairly timeless, and there's a reason for that. My number one message to everybody here is that the Water Quality Agreement, the words on the page are very good. They're very solid. They were established after lots of deliberation, after hearing from stakeholders around the region. And so the effectiveness of the Water Quality Agreement stems not so much from ink on a piece of paper, but more from the implementation of this critical document. I should also mention too, and this gets lost in the shuffle way too many times, that the agreement is important, again, not just because of the words on the page, but at least here in the US, I'll let John speak to Canada, but here in the US, the agreement has been recognized within federal law, the Clean Water Act. And that's important because that helps get at this notion that it's one thing to put words on a page, it's an entirely different thing to take those words on the page and turn them, transition them into action. Whether it's taking inspiration from the agreement to be a water walker like Lisa, or it's taking the words on the page as a conservancy and protecting the lands that drain into the Great Lakes, or it's just being an individual resident of the Great Lakes Basin who in your day-to-day life makes decisions about how to keep our water clean, healthy, and safe. All of us as players fall under that rubric of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. All of us have a role to play in the implementation of the words on the page. I should clarify too, I was a lead negotiator, not the lead negotiator. I was one of a team from the EPA and the State Department who sat around the table and met until the wee hours to negotiate the 2012 agreement. In fact, there was one day we met so long that one of the chairs under one of our negotiation team members collapsed under him. So you could take my word for it. There was a lot of thought and a lot of effort that went into crafting this latest iteration of the agreement. I think it's a phenomenal agreement in that it provides enough precision and clarity on direction, while at the same time providing flexibility to try to keep moving in the direction under that purpose. Let me wrap up by giving you some of the greatest hits of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. These are some of the provisions that we negotiated, we folded into this latest version that I think get overlooked a lot of times, unless you are a real student of the agreement like John is and Dave and many others. We, for the very first time, wove into the agreement the concept of sustainability. And you can see this under some of the principles and approaches section of the agreement. But sustainability is one of my favorites, because all of the annexes, all of the individual things we need to do to tackle specific topics need to, at the end of the day, implement these principles and approaches. One of them, sustainability, is one of my favorites, because what it basically says is, and what we essentially did, was to recognize the multi-generational standard of care needed to address current needs while enhancing the ability of future generations to meet their needs. I think we all assumed going into 2012, we all assumed that the Water Quality Agreement, properly implemented, would help and will continue to help future generations. But for the first time, we explicitly stated generations yet to be born have a stake, an ownership stake, an interest in the health of the Great Lakes, and we need to be executing the Great Lakes for them, not just for us. Some of the other principles and approaches that I think are really important, the notion of prevention, making sure that we are anticipating threats to the Great Lakes and preventing them from happening. It's not just about, oh my gosh, oil spill, we got to go clean it up, and then we're behind the 8 ball, so to speak. It's also about trying to continually make sure that we're safeguarding the Great Lakes from future threats. And it goes hand in hand with the notion of precaution. We cannot afford to wait for perfect scientific knowledge in order to take steps and to take action. Another one of my greatest hits of the Great Lakes, and by my, it's not necessarily that I wrote it in, I did have a hand in this one, but it's just because I think it's one of these real hidden treasures within the pages of the Great Lakes, is Article 6. Article 6 gets at the notion of notification and response. It doesn't have to do with any one particular threat or issue, but what it does do is it obligates the federal governments, when it becomes aware of a pollution incident, or could be, when we could be facing a pollution incident, obligates the US and Canadian federal governments to notify the stakeholders that are part of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement family about those threats. A lot of times we've seen in the history of the Great Lakes, like many other places around the world, where something happens or something's gonna happen, but people don't have the knowledge that a proposal is on the table, let's say in New York or Ontario. when that something could be happening on the other side of Ontario or in Minnesota. We wanted this notification and response provision forces information out into the open if properly used. And when I was at least still with the Obama administration, we used it to put on the table information about proposed hog farms in the Lake Superior Basin, big facilities that had never existed in those places before. That's not the kind of incident or activity that necessarily would have been notified to the larger Great Lakes family had Article 6 not been in this document. I'll close with another one of my top 10, and that is under Annex 7. Now, Annex, not Article, Annex 7, B1. We included language into the agreement that requires the federal government to achieve a net gain in habitat. Until that point, federal wetlands law was essentially to minimize the loss of wetlands, no net loss of wetlands. We now have in our agreement an obligation for net gain. It's not good enough to simply slow down the loss of something valuable like habitat, like wetlands. We actually have to bring them back. And I think this is a provision within the agreement that very few people are actually aware of, and that the two federal governments, I think, have been trying to work on setting a baseline so they can help measure habitat and help ultimately increase it. Those are some of the, to me, really kind of exciting things about the 2012 agreement, all built on generations of agreements before then that helped us get to this point. But I'll close with the same thought that I had in the very beginning, and that is that this agreement provides some granularity and some direction, while at the same time providing flexibility, but it's really up to us to implement. It's up to us to push the US and Canadian governments to implement. If we do that, and this group is part of that, the agreement means much, much more than just the words on the page. So with that, Mary, I will stop, and I really appreciate the invitation today.
Okay, I guess I'm up now. Mary, can you put the first slide up, please? Great, thanks. And thank you, Cam, for really laying out the principles, which are really important for people to grasp and understand, because they're the bases upon which we, as citizens in the basin, as activists in the basin, community members in the basin, that those principles are things that we need to use and are using in our work to push the governments to do an ever better job. What I'm going to talk about is the critical role of the community activists, and over the 50 years, and the critical role that we have for the future. And I just want to say, I feel incredibly fortunate, because I've been lucky enough to be working throughout the Great Lakes with activist groups, with the citizens activist groups for about 40 years. I've gotten to know all the people's favorite nooks and crannies. I love it when I go to work with them and they take me to their special secret little place in the basin. Throughout the entire basin, it's been a rare adventure. But it also has been incredibly inspiring, not just because of the lakes, but because of all the people out there who are working so hard to take care of their communities and to take care of the lakes, and you're part of that. Can you go to the next slide, please? The citizen role in the Water Quality Agreement is right from the very beginning. This is people in Cleveland demonstrating because of the condition of Lake Erie. This is in the 1960s, and you all have heard the stories, if you weren't there at the time, of the dead, smelly fish along the shores of Lake Erie, etc. And this sort of action, save Lake Erie, and people dressed much better when they were demonstrating back in then than they do today. But anyway, and I was never one to be dressed up like that, I must say. But They created the pressure, and along with the scientists' information that they were bringing us, that created the first signing of the first water quality agreement, 1972. So the next slide, please. This is the actual official signing. And I always like to use this picture because I love the contrast between Nixon, who's looking a little dour, and the impish sort of looking Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, and with the, always the red rose in his lapel and so on. But despite those very contrasting personalities and very contrasting politics, they got together and signed this and supported their people who worked so hard to put this agreement together. Can we go on to the next slide now, please? The other thing is, I think it's important, we often forget the role that labor has played in taking care of the Great Lakes and being part of it. And this is a picture in the same year the agreement was signed, in 1972, of the United Auto Workers out demonstrating on the first Earth Day, because remember, the first Earth Day was just a couple of weeks after the first signing of the first water quality agreement. And they're out there in the Detroit River, have met in the center of the river, just demonstrating for doing a better job and cleaning up. Can you go to the next slide, please? A big turning point and a real increase in citizen action happened in 1970s, and you see very heavily 80s as well as 90s. But the governments had announced that they were going to renegotiate the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And the Great Lakes United, which is an organization of citizens groups from all across the basin, we organized public hearings, citizens hearings. They were all the way from Duluth, there were 19 of them, all the way from Duluth to Montreal, where citizens were actually the ones who sat at the table, taking evidence, asking questions from first people in communities in terms of what changes had they seen? How had the lakes changed? And how was that affecting them? And how was that affecting what they wanted to do with their lives? And what did it make them worry about in the future? And they really came forward with strong recommendations as well as strong concerns about where we had to go forward. The next slide, please. So we took that evidence, in fact, that the public had brought us and turned it into a report called A Citizens Review of the International Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And we used that document throughout the renegotiation of the agreement to take to the governments and say, this is what the people who live there are seeing. This is what they need to have changed. And it became a very powerful involvement of the public in the negotiation of that hearing of the new agreement in '87. And as an example of that, the governments, in recognition of the importance of what the public had brought forward, actually for the first time had appointed what called official observers. There were 2 on the Canadian side. I was lucky enough to be one of those, and 3 on the US side who were actually part of the negotiations. They were called official observers to the negotiations, but we were at the negotiating team meetings on each side, making input throughout. We were there on the final day of negotiations, and even on that day, brought in language that you can see added to the agreement that came very specifically from what we brought forward at those days. And I remember on the final day of negotiations, we broke out, there was some concerns about the air annex, broke into a group, and a couple of our colleagues from the environmental community got this language put into it, which was very significant. Singly or in synergistic or additive combination with other substances. They had to be looked at substances, not just one by one, but in terms of their cumulative effects. That wording came directly from our people sitting there at the table on that last day of negotiation. Let's go to the next slide. That participation in the water quality agreement renegotiation, not just at the table, but all the people who were talking about it, made people start to think this agreement is our agreement, and starting to see this not just as something that the governments assigned, but it was for us. It was something we wanted, and therefore the need to increase our pressure on the governments to make sure that they implement it. And you see an ongoing period of heavy community involvement in the agreement itself over the next while. This is a meeting of the International Joint Commission, and you see the commissioners are sitting there in the front row. It's at the luncheon. And this meeting in Hamilton has 700 people out at it. Generally, the IJC meetings only had a couple of hundred. They were basically government and science people. But here, people from throughout the Great Lakes Basin come and rallied. And they pushed for the Great Lakes, no time to waste. That was our banner. This is the luncheon speaker here, was Joyce McLean with Greenpeace. And it was just an incredibly powerful thing. And one of the things that came out of this was the recommendation that Lake Superior, yes, the cleanest, wonderful, but can we keep it that way? And therefore, use that zero discharge principle as a demonstration of how to have zero discharge. And amazingly, the IJC made that as a recommendation then, and the governments, the state, provincial, and 2 federal governments signed an agreement for zero discharge and continue to work on it through their committees today. Can we go to the next slide, please? These meetings, and this is a picture of the Windsor meeting, which is one of the largest meetings, 2,000 people at that in 1993, but again, became a rallying place for the public to speak with and to the governments about what they needed. This was an incredibly important meeting in terms of the pushing for implementation of zero discharge and virtual elimination. There was a real focus on chlorinated substances and the impacts that they were having on the environment and continue to have. So let's just go to the last slide. What we've seen since that period is a decrease actually in the extent of community involvement on the basin-wide perspective and on the water quality agreement. And I think there's been some sense from some people that we aren't really getting value out of it. I don't agree with that. And I think that it's essential that we make sure that we continue to rally around the agreement because it brings us many things. Recently, we formed a group, the Great Lakes Ecoregion Network, which is made up of individuals and organizations, again, from all across the basin, from Duluth to Montreal, who are committed now to working during this year, the anniversary of the Water Quality Agreement, to do an assessment of the progress over those years, but also to put together an agenda for what we have to do for the next years and to recommit ourselves. Also, in part of that is to rally people around the meeting, which will be in Niagara Falls at the end of September, and which is, again, a biennial meeting. But also part of our work is very much to make sure that we're including in this the cultural aspects that people were talking about earlier, to include in this, make sure that we're including the arts aspects, which are so important, the writing and the art and theater. And those are all things that add to the dynamism of it, add to the depth of it. And I know as many of us think back over the past years, it's the memory of some of those types of events that really had the greatest power in our memories. So I wanted to get out that message of the importance of having the real public involvement in these activities. And the agreement will not work unless we are there pushing for it, participating in it. So thank you.
Hi, this is Dave Dempsey. I want to facilitate a Q&A, but before I do that, I want to encourage people to post their questions in the Q&A spot down there at the bottom of the screen. We don't have any questions yet, so I want to ask a question of my esteemed heroes and colleagues, Cam and John. If you were to walk down the street in any Great Lakes community and ask people, what is the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement? You might get 1% or less that would actually know what it is. What can we do to popularize the agreement so that more people are aware of it and what it's about?
John, do you want to go, or do you
Go
want
ahead.
me to take a whack at it?
Okay.
Okay. I think, Dave, the first thing I would do was not actually start talking about the agreement. I think it's much more important to start where people are and just find out what actions they're taking in their daily lives. A lot of times people are members of Friends of the Dempsey Beach, or they are part of the Jackson Harbor Fishery Commission or something like that. And then back into a conversation that might go something like, did you know that you could use the agreement to help push forward, some of the things that you're really trying to achieve? And then just talk to them about it. But I do think if we start with the agreement, it's almost like me as a lawyer starting to talk about Section 118 of the Clean Water Act. You could see people passing out as you try to have those kinds of conversations. But talk about real places and the real priorities that people have, and chances are really good that the agreement can add fuel to those efforts without even really thinking too much about it.
I totally agree with Cam that it's the agreement is it's what the condition of the lakes that we have to talk with people about. What's their experience in terms of lakes? Are they getting better or not? What are their ongoing concerns? And then to make people aware of how the water quality agreement may add value to them. It's one of the things that's really important is people work in their own communities, and it's incredibly important, often doing the same fight over and over, fighting incinerator in that community, and someone has to fight an incinerator in the next community, or it gets passed on to the next place. What we want to be able to do is get together as communities, basin-wide, and say, these are the common problems that we share. And maybe if we get together, we can actually get changes made in the laws, et cetera, that will mean that we don't have to keep having that same fight over and over and can focus on others. And by working across the basin together and recognizing that, hey, the water quality agreement can bring us some of the push and the power to push for those things, we can certainly help do it. But I agree, there is no way you start by talking with, and it doesn't alarm me when we see the statistics in terms of who knows what the water quality agreement is. That doesn't alarm me when those statistics are low.
Thanks, John. We now have 3 questions that have been submitted. I think we're going to need the respondents to be fairly concise because I do want to get onto the arts part of this meeting. But there's a question I think would be best answered by you, John. It was, how were Indigenous communities involved in the 1986 hearings on Great Lakes water pollution? If they weren't, how were their visions and values incorporated?
Well, certainly in terms of the hearings that we held, there were a lot of Indigenous people that came out and spoke at those meetings, and they're reflected in the report that we put together of Unfulfilled Promises. In terms of the actual government process, there was involvement of them at the table. They weren't negotiators in that sense, and none of the people, for example, of the 5 people that were more directly observer negotiators, they weren't that, but they were at the meetings that the Canadian governments and the US governments held to get input from people. But certainly it was far from anything that the tribes and the First Nations would consider adequate in terms of what they want as being really parties to it, not just someone that is living in the basin.
The next question might be best addressed to the Sea Grant staff here. It says, how widespread and effective has Sea Grant's Clean Marina initiatives been in creating engaged citizen advocates? I don't know who wants to take that one on. Mary?
Yeah, I can take that on. Clean Marina is not my initiative, so I don't have all the details, but I know we have a lot of program or a lot of details on our website. So I'm going to go ahead and post a link to that in the chat, and then folks can check it out there. And we'll also have our contact information if we don't quite get you the answer that you were looking for.
Thanks. Now, the next question, the last one on the box right here, is from somebody named Gail. I don't know if John or Cam have ever heard of her, but she wants to know, how would you measure success in the next 20 years? What are the most pressing challenges in your opinion? So let's start with Cam on that one.
Sure, make sure I'm still off mute. I think that measuring success really has to do with how healthy the Great Lakes are, how usable they are. When it comes to measuring the success of the Great Lakes here in the US, and really under the agreement as well, are they fishable? Are they swimmable? Are they drinkable? Now, those are very kind of anthropocentric answers. I'd go a step further and say, are the fish free from toxics? Are we preventing self-reproducing populations of invasive species like Asian carp or invasive carp from getting into the Great Lakes? And that's an interesting one. How you prevent something bad from happening has to be a measure of success, but you're also measuring the absence of something by doing that. It's really easy once you have a toxic hotspot, an area of concern, to know whether or not you're making progress in cleaning it up. It's a lot harder to measure success if you're keeping something bad from happening. And given the preventative nature of the agreement that I mentioned in my segment of the panel, that's where the real challenge is.
John?
We have to be looking towards new solutions and taking a leap forward, because we're still not focused enough on prevention, as Cam just said. We're not going to solve the toxics problem, for example, and we're not going to solve any of the other problems if we don't immediately start saying, wait, it's not just how much more polluted or how much more land do we allow to be habitat allowed to be destroyed, and how can we minimize that? We have to change our methods so they're not having any of it. So toxic substances, we have to just stop using them. And we have to have much better rules and laws about that. And if we don't make that sort of leap. And the same in terms of habitat. It's not to think somehow we'll be able to restore it down the road. And well, we only allowed a certain acreage to go to use, so it's not as many as we used to do. We have to just change our development, etc., so it doesn't. We need some dramatic leaps forward in the approach, not just more sort of step-by-step forward, because with each of those is frequently a step backwards.
Thank you, John. We're going to move from this part of the discussion to the creative arts and fostering greater binational connections and public involvement across the Great Lakes Basin.
Thank you, Dave and Cam and John. That was a really great synopsis of the water quality agreement. And I especially like the part talking about we all have a role to play, and we need to go ahead and figure out what that role is, and we all can do that. Because it's our future we're thinking about, and the future of future generations as well. So our next panel is going to be talking about the creative arts and fostering a greater binational connection and moving people or involving people across the Great Lakes Basin as we think about the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and the Great Lakes and how to get more people involved. And I think it's the creative arts is a way to do that. So our speakers are Todd Fleet, who's the Canadian director for the Great Lakes Creative Hub, and Mark Matson, the director of Swim, Fish, Drink. So following their remarks, Tom Leonard will close things out with questions and answers and a closing statement. So go ahead and take over there, Todd.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, everybody. Amazing presentation so far. But we're going to change gears a little bit, but we will circle back and connect all the dots with Mark's presentation because it brings together the arts with the theme of the environment. Tom had asked me to speak a little more on kind of the artistic, creative, and cultural aspects of the Great Lakes Creative Hub and how we use arts and can use arts to promote different themes. In this particular case, environment, the Great Lakes, our waterways, and just up that impact. And how do we reach more people? How can we engage? How can we leaving lasting impressions in our communities that are seen over time, right? So these are the kind of things that I'll speak to here, but also, and it was mentioned by Kim and John as well, and theirs is the action. How do you get there? And that's one of the biggest kind of hurdles we've discovered on our journey through the creation of this hub was we had a lot of people enthusiastic, but nobody really knew how to get the ball rolling. So as a little background, just to know how I got involved with the hub, Tom had one day called me completely out of the blue. I did not know Tom up until this point. And so I guess he had seen some of the programming and projects that we had been working on. And so he approached me, called me up, and he just said, like, what do you think of using the models and kind of that methodology that you're using in your programming and develop that into a binational, multidisciplinary, arts and culture partnership and program network. It sounds like a lot of things, and it is. In our process, we were doing that same process and had basically got to past the regional into like the provincial level on our side. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, by the way. And so that was it started our discussions about this. And so I'm going to dive into a little more on the nuts and bolts on how we put together these projects and kind of the impacts and levering these things to have bigger impact for whatever our theme or messaging may be. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen. So as we say here, arts and culture as a vehicle for community engagement and change. So as we say, like arts and culture, very, very powerful tool that can be used. It's very approachable. It hits every demographic. So these are kind of some of the projects that I put together to give you kind of a case study of how we put this together. It's mostly, a lot of these are education-based. Our focus on this is visual arts just because they're easy to represent and show in a slideshow in a limited amount of time. We're not going to be able to deep dive on a lot of this stuff just because there's so much content there, but we'll in the future probably have some more webinars where we explore this a little deeper. So we will get started with these are a number of community art projects is kind of what we started off calling this, and it was a generalized thing. And at first we weren't sure, what we wanted to do or what we should be doing. So we reached out, and so we reached out community partner, artists, all kinds of stakeholders within the community. And so we developed these projects based on the feedback we got from them. So we had a lot of things that were different demographics we're going to. We had focus was youth, but we did want diversity and inclusion. So we included all of our First Nations and other interest groups. And so basically, I'll just read this off. So by working with community partners, artists, and stakeholders, we've been very successful in revitalizing neighborhoods, providing mentorship, professional development, and network opportunities for youth, promoting arts and culture, and creating economic opportunities in the sector, and bringing together cross-cultural communities to share and celebrate diversity and inclusion. So I'll just run through a bunch of these and you'll kind of see how they're all threaded together. When we were designing these to stack on top of each other. And from an educational perspective, we wanted to cover from basically elementary right past post-secondary and beyond. So a lot of these ones were done with, we'll say, not obvious partners. Sometimes they are obvious, sometimes not. But getting out in the community and finding alignments. And that was one of the biggest things and that helps us get these actions underway. We did all this in a very short period of time. We were on a part of what was called the Future Sault Ste. Marie project. It was an economic diversification and redevelopment project within the community. So we had a limited framework to do this in. So this has all taken place since I believe 2019, and we finished up most of it in 2021. So our first project here, we had a public art project and some public piano projects. So these, again, we were reaching out to the community, found out things that people wanted to do, and the youth really liked music. So we were looking at what can we put out into the community for the youth where they would be able to do what they like to do, which was play music. So we kind of developed this piano project. And as this, we put it right into the curriculum, and it was part of the high skills major program. We did this with several of these programs. So this one was put out, and I believe there was 5 elementary schools that were involved, and they did the design work, and then it went to the high schools, and the high schools students painted them. The furniture project was actually with some other, we'll say, not obvious cultural partners. There we partnered with Habitat for Humanity, our local college, and some of our social service employment organizations to create this business or building maintenance and construction program where they built these materials, learned the skills. At this point, it was housed at my former employer, which is Canadian Bushman Heritage Center. I was the curator there. So they create these furniture pieces, and then they spend some time there doing that. When I was in the museum, they used to build exhibits for us, learn the basic skills. Then we would send them up to Habitat for Humanity, where then they would work on the Habitat house. And then the benefit to that is all of the people, contractors that are involved with Habitat would have this stream of potential employees. So we're using it as more than just an outreach, and we're creating some furniture and putting that out. By the way, the furniture was all created and then it was put down in our downtown for everybody to enjoy. And we rotated the location of these throughout the downtown. So making these little hubs where people could gather and sit. Obviously, this one's going back a little bit before COVID. But again, creating more than just some furniture that we put in the public. So we were helping develop these employment programs, supporting these folks to get back out there. Also with the pianos, people were all playing these pianos in public, but the students got to engage in that. They got to be part of that, create those, and they actually owned. And that ownership and engagement were huge keys we found in this. So one of the other projects we did as part of this community art project, we did GFL Memorial Gardens, which is our big arena here. We did a mural project in there in which we wanted to set it up so the students would get an experience of what it would be like to do this type of project as a professional artist. So we took them through the entire process here. So we engaged them with some community partners. Within this mural project, there was 3 components. They had just built and installed a new Hockey Hall of Fame. They had a war memorial there. And then they had a new kind of lounge area that they were developing, and they wanted to attract people there. So what they did is we engaged those, we brought the students together with these stakeholders whom they never met before, and that kind of cross-pollination between the older generation, because we had a Veterans Association, the Legion, which tended to be a little older, interacting with all these youth. And it was amazing how much neither group knew about each other. So it was like one of those things where we could bring them together through the art project, and these people were really connecting and actually finding out what each other were about and supporting each other. And you can see in the one photo on the left at the top there, that was one of the workshops we had in that new lounge. So what we did is we challenged the students to come up with projects. If they could do anything in the community that they wanted to, what would they build? And so we said, we're going to do this in a kind of a crazy way where you can have, there's like carte blanche, you can make anything is possible. And then we had them do projects that were realistic that they could do with a given budget. So they went through and they did the process, and through that elimination and working through all that kind of ICE training. So it's innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship that we were doing with the high skills major program, that they were able to kind of create these different scenarios and programs that meant something to them. So they were engaged, they were building their own community for the future. And these are the kind of power that arts can bring into this, and this kind of collaboration. And normally, you know, you see the kids and they're just talking on the phone about whatever. But this, it was amazing to see this. We had over 100 kids participate in this. But they sat down, they came up, and one of the projects that they came up with, which we didn't say, was the mural project for this. So on the outcomes, what we had was this other kind of learning curve as artists. Arts are not very well supported in our education system. There's very, very limited opportunities to do any kind of public art. So this is one of those opportunities we wanted to walk them through the process. So in the future, if they ever wanted to do this on their own, they would have the skills or know how to go about it, how to put together a proposal, who to approach, like how do you get partners, how do you fund this stuff, and all that kind of stuff. So as part of that, we had the students come over and they did presentations to us as city representatives. And then we had, as they got into it and started to develop their drafts and those kind of things, we had all these groups of stakeholders go and do reviews with the students, what they liked, what they didn't want. For this instance, you can see here that one of the examples is the Sioux Greyhound. So they did up these, and then we had to get the Sioux Greyhound folks to go in and do a review, and they say, oh, well, you can, yes, you can do this, or you can do that with the logos, because it's just like working with an actual client. And then the outcome of that is we had a big unveiling for these three things, one in the Hockey Hall of Fame, one outside this lounge, and then one at the War Memorial. And there was hundreds of people, but it was just great to see the crowds. The kids were very proud. They took ownership of that. And they had a good sense of community there. And it's hard to instill that in kids now. So it was a great, great project. Carrying that forward, so that was at the high school level. On the secondary level, we partnered with our Sioux College, and they have a graphic design program there. And I was actually, I went through it when I was doing my fine arts degree. And so I knew the professor, he was one of my professors there. And so I was like, how can we engage the students? Because they're very locked into their university or their college. So I was like, how can we get them out into the community and showing their art, that they're designers and this kind of stuff. So we kind of came up with this traffic box wrap program and integrated it right into their curriculum. So it is actually one of the curriculum, I guess, projects that you can select, and they actually get a grade for it. And then at the end, what we did that same process where they had to do all their design briefs and then present it. They came down to City Hall and presented it to us. And we had a bunch of community designers and business owners and that come to give them real world feedback. And so these kind of things were really great for these students to learn that process, because they were just graduating students. And a bonus for this is, as they're graduating, they already have a public art project now in their portfolios, which to our research, there is still no other college that does this kind of thing, where right in the curriculum, the students come out of their class and they're graduated with a public art credit under their belt. What we also did to support is we did media blasts and invited media to come, and they did interviews. So these students coming out also had social media content now for their portfolios. They also had media, like they had newspaper clippings and all those kind of things that, normally they wouldn't have got those opportunities and now the benefits to the college are, wow, now they got this new resource that they can use to promote their program. Another thing we did to get that out into the public is they always did their graduation shows usually at the college. So it was a few students that walked by, they'd like eat all the food and leave, and you get the parents and that, but there wasn't a real connection to the rest of the arts and culture sector. So what we did is we helped them with their grad show and connected them with our Sault Ste. Marie Museum here. And we had it throughout all the floors of our Sault Ste. Marie Museum. So we had the students placed on the landings and the stairwells in the exhibits. And then we invited the entire arts and culture sector to come. So we were putting potential employers directly in front of them. We were having other artists that they could, bounce ideas off, network, meet, congregate around something that they cared about. So these are two very successful ones. Traffic wrap is an ongoing. Everything that we tried to design is to stack and weave a foundation for everything that's coming next. Not doing too many one and dones with a lot of these. So that sustainability is always a big key for these. Another key for a lot of these was using resources that already exist. We didn't reinvent the wheel on any of this. So I'll use this traffic box project again as another example. Is, you know, the college is already doing design programs. Why not do this? The city is already wrapping traffic box with like script that just says Sault Ste. Marie, Sault Ste. Marie, Sault Ste. Marie. Why don't we put something that can actually attract and have impact? And, you know, we can create that into a tour and people can go around the city and check out all these really cool traffic boxes and that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that we were doing in that context, but I'm going to keep moving just because we have quite a bit to go through. Another one of the projects that we did, so we connected into the bigger world with professional artists to come in with the students, teach them actual stuff, produce actual artwork in the school. So this was White Pines School here. So this is Q Rock with a hat on there. He's a professional hip hop and a graffiti artist. And he came in and he kind of described the connection between Indigenous culture and hip hop culture. So Q Rock, when he grew up, he was in the Bronx. He was a young man. He used to go down where they used to break dance and everything. And he's like, hey, you should check that out. And he's like, hey, where'd you guys learn how to dance like that? And he's like, oh, that's like grass dancing or jingle dancing. And so there was a lot of connections like that. So when he came down and he was pointing these out to the kids, they're like, oh, geez, that's cool. So it was really an access point for Indigenous culture for them to have that like a relevant to their age and interest group connection to another culture. So that was a fabulous project. You can see there, he did kind of the Indigenous stories as far as, you know, the clans and the grandfather stories, sacred geometry, and they used those and he taught them those stories through these pieces of artwork, which I thought was just fabulous. Going again to the next levels, we were also looking for our artists a way that there was no exhibition opportunities to show you that we have one art gallery, it's booked forever. And so how could we help early career artists get going? So what we did is we reached out, and this is kind of by chance. I used to share the office with our film and television media coordinator. So they were a new post-production facility called Rolling Pictures came in, and through her, I got a tour of it before it did even open. And I was like, wow, this would be a great gallery space. So once they were up and running, we approached them and kind of developed this ArtX project. So what we did with that was we wanted it to be for early career artists to have a chance to show their work, learn how to put together gallery shows in the public, kind of curate their own shows, what's involved in putting together this type of a project. So we kind of did this. What we did was we selected 3 artists that applied through, and I knew some of them through different projects, and I'll explain that in the next one. But so we brought them in and we set it up so that it was by donation. So there was no admission, no barriers. We wanted everybody to come in and enjoy this. But we did have a donation box, and all donations and proceeds went to the artist. We had charged no commissions on any of the artwork. 100% went to support the artists. And we did all the promotion. So the actual expense for each one of these, and we did 4 of them to date, was only about $200, $250. So value here is just huge. Another thing that came, and it was an advantage of our partnership with Rolling Pictures, was all of the social media, and we did an actual screening within their screening room of videos of all the artists, biographies and short films of all the artists. And those were created and donated as part of Rolling Pictures. So they let us use their space and they created this. This is huge for young starting artists. There is no way you would be able to afford normally to develop that kind of content. So doing that was a huge jump forward, and I'll get more into details on that on another example later. But you can see here, so how are we promoting this? We just simply made a few posters and plastered our downtown using our downtown association. So our downtown association, you'll see there all the artwork in the window with the advertisements and that kind of stuff saying, come here. Well, that was their front window and the gallery was actually right above. So using these other partnerships in conjunction with this to help marketing and kind of spread the load, like I said, very minimal input, very big impacts.
Excuse me,
Another one
Todd.
that's, oh,
Excuse me,
sorry.
Todd. Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're running a little long. Could we kind of wrap up? Maybe, how much longer do we need? 'Cause we
Yeah,
wanna
just
get-
give me a few and I'll get going. So
Okay,
another one.
that'd be great. Thanks,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so another one we had was Palm Wall display. So another opportunity for early career artists to display their artwork in public and basically told their bio and give their contact information so people want to check out their artwork, they could. This all was coming together and leading to kind of what comes next as far as steps in this kind of evolution and pathway we were creating in the cultural sector to the Summer Moon Festival. So these were large scale murals. There was musical component and also some other community components. And again, we made sure that there was lots of inclusion and diversity and consultation with all communities and types to come together to participate in this. And some more of these murals that we did in the downtown, again, using non-conventional partnerships. So we, with our local PUC, we kind of used their building to do these murals. Other ones, there was a parking structure here that was basically abandoned. So we contacted the owner, they let us do it. It was a total change for this part of the downtown area for revitalizing. And all of those were kind of put together into a downtown mural tour. So we're just skimming the surface on a lot of these. Another mural project we did was in one of our socially and economically depressed areas where we actually reached out, engaged with the local residents, had them come out and they painted murals. So there was lots of cool stuff like that. Just a summary. So, you know, these are people that you're going to talk to if you want to do these. You know, even if your focus is an environment in this case or whatever, these kind of, these are the steps and the people you're going to want to talk to, and it's applicable through any kind of project or program you're going to develop. So for us, it was the artists and the orgs, getting them on board. Interest groups, we explored all over private sector, non-for-profit service organizations. So looking for non-traditional alignments, government ABCs, so that's agencies, boards and commissions, going through all those at the 3 levels of government in Canada. And there's lots of place to walk around and explore because a lot of those are siloed. Culturally diverse and inclusive community groups. Don't be afraid to reach out because you don't know anybody there or anything. Everybody that we reached out to opened their door and invited us in. And I put education, which is ABC, but in with the youth groups because we kind of, all the programming we did there was about education and youth. So we just wanted there. And if we wanted to engage them, just ask what they want and listen. Some of the alignments and outcomes, you know, opportunities for professional development, networking, promotion, portfolio development, project funding, sponsorship, mentorship, community engagement, promotion. This is for interest groups, new networks of volunteers, customers, ability to access hard to reach demographics for the government, help with promotion of new policies, raise awareness for policy changes, tourism product development, economic diversification, community renewal tools, instilling pride and general quality of life, etc. You know, and for the historically underrepresented groups, you know, arts and culture is a great non-confrontational, informal way to create and open those dialogues and understanding between the different cultures. And we found that was great. We learned so much in the stories that were going back and forth, but especially between our Indigenous community partners, that it was just phenomenal. And youth, they get to be part of the leadership role instead of just being told what they can do. They get to decide what they want to do. And it instills pride and ownership in the future. So I just want to leave you here quickly with a couple of videos. One is of...
Todd, we're having technical difficulties. So we're going to ask our next speaker, Mark Matson, to go ahead and come on. But thank you very much for your presentation. And like you said, we will have a future webinar where you can dig deeper into all of this, because it's important work that you're doing and we appreciate it. So, Mark?
Oh, well, thanks a lot. And thank you, Todd. I'm actually working on Wolf Island today out by the river. So if I look a little cold, it's because I am. It's really great to be on with everyone today. It's a new group. I know John well, John Jackson. We've been on the Great Lakes Water Quality Board for a number of years, and I've known John before that. And usually I'd be called in to talk about laws or enforcement of environmental law. I'm an environmental lawyer, have been for 30 years. I've been on the Great Lakes Water Quality Board for I think 6 years. Great Lakes Guardians in Ontario for a number of years. Founded Lake Ontario Waterkeeper and president of Swinburne Fish now. I wanted to talk a bit about the role of the artist in actually helping us fulfill the a lot of the amazing vision and goals of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. My insight on this over the years has been that, you know, everybody wants to protect water. I mean, and on the Great Lakes, everybody is part of the ecosystem. We all drink the water, we're part of the ecosystem. And most of us, according to many of the polls, you know, really want to connect with the Great Lakes in meaningful ways, want access to the swimmable, drinkable, fishable water, which is a really great term used in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And I'll speak more about that later. And, you know, and why would you want to protect water? Well, it's so obvious. You know, we're 70% water. The world's covered in water. We can't live without it. It's important to our culture, our economy. There's just so many reasons why the Great Lakes should be the best protected freshwater ecosystem in the world. But I don't think there's anybody on this call who isn't very concerned about the Great Lakes and where we're going and what the next 50 years looks like. If we think about the 50-year water quality agreement, and what is that? What is it going to take to truly live up to the incredible law and policy and public health regs and all of that that's come out of the last 25 years of a real focus on the Great Lakes, or 50 years. And I think what I have learned from artists is that you need to connect people at the heart, not just at the mind. Reason, as Blake said 300 years ago, you know, the horses of instruction aren't as strong as the tigers of passion, and you know, and the heart and people's love for things really tend to get them motivated and put in the work and put in the time. They understand their role, and so much of that comes out from emotional connections. And who are our leaders on that? The poets, the writers, the artists, photographers, the painters. And I've worked a lot with the artists around the Great Lakes. We have an Art for Water, or an Artists for Water program for 8 years where we curated art, and we've sold that to support our work. We've used that money to build the swim guide, connecting people to recreational water and beaches, and, you know, making sure that they have real-time water quality monitoring for those areas, and what are the rules and the risk assessments and the regs, so that they can answer the swimming or the question, can I go swimming? Now, if they go swimming, usually it takes communities a lot to create swimmable water, because over the last 50 years, you know, we took a lot of that for granted in the late 60s, and people said, why would I ever swim in the Great Lakes? Well, that's ridiculous. Of course, the Great Lakes are swimmable, but in a lot of urban areas, a lot of places, it's the no swimming signs, it's the stormwater and the sewage overflows that really, you know, turn those into bacterial laden waters, so they're not unswimmable. And we thought by putting up the no swimming signs, we were protecting the people from getting sick. But in reality, we were pushing generations away from the lakes. They never made that connection. They never had that experience. They never got in the water or learned how to do it. You know, they might have not had the money or the mentors to take them to other lakes or other places or cleaner places. And so we pushed generations away from our lakes. And how are we going to get them back? Talking about E. coli and 100 colony forming units for 100 milliliters. And no, we talk about it through the artists bring us back again to this idea of connection. I know I heard from the elder earlier, I think Denemy, and she really, you know, she mentioned the water walkers. And I took a lot from Josephine Manamy back in 2006 and her connection to the water and just walking the water's edge, the beauty and taking notice of it. And really, she was able to to talk about that in a way through her storytelling, which was so beautiful, that really just made me, want to get out of that rational, legal, scientific mind and go straight to the heart and go, yeah, I love these Great Lakes too. Oh yeah, my family made sacrifices to keep these lakes, so that I could go swimming, so that I could enjoy the fish. And of course, many of them did it for the wildlife, because if humans don't protect the Great Lakes for themselves, well, the fish and the birds can't read the signs. They can't do the monitoring. They don't do the risk assessment calculations. They're left on their own. So if humans abandon swimmable, drinkable, fishable water, then the ecosystem suffers. And so we've really, built strong relationships with the art community to help us get people back to the water's edge, to connect them again with the Great Lakes. And I think that's so essential over the next 50 years. And I'll just say, I don't need to be a long time on this, but I'll say that, this Great Lakes Public Forum, I'm really hopeful. I know I've talked to John and others. I'm really hopeful that it's more than just a bunch of science and a bunch of lawyers and politicians getting together talking about the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. I hope that the artists and others from that community come and help us explain why these agreements are so important to an ecosystem that has 8 states, 2 provinces, 2 federal countries, Canada, the US, many, many municipalities, towns, islands, so many different cross jurisdictions. The indigenous communities, that were basically left out of the original treaties around the IJC, are now being brought in and embraced, and they need to find their role in the next 50 years. We need to find where the money's coming from to go and see through some of the visions we have for swimmable, drinkable, fishable Great Lakes. And finally, we also need to keep doing the work we've been doing for 50 years. It's not going away. The toxic legacies of the waste that's been deposited in our harbors, that we talked about for many, many years. Many people forget about it now, or it's just been ignored. The sewage and stormwater overflows and the lack of capacity at our cities, still critical infrastructure dollars needed. And then the emerging threats. When we think about plastics, when we think about the climate crisis, when we think about PFAS and other emerging contaminants of concern, there's so much still more to learn. So how are we going to do this? We need everybody on the Great Lakes involved. We need to move from beyond just, as John said, a dramatically forward approach. We need to include everyone. We need people at the Great Lakes Public Forum, new people. We need new, diverse communities to connect to the Great Lakes and to be involved in protecting it. And for us, anyways, at Swim Drink Fish, our experience has been that the artists are prophetic. They're ahead of their time. They see things that many of us aren't seeing, and they help us explain things. And it was the artist who really came to me very early on and said, that Swim Drink Fish thing, that really explains, what I believe the Great Lakes should represent more than, all the issues I just laid out or talking about the policies or the laws. And I think the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement really was where that came from. This fishable, swimmable, drinkable. The idea that, in Canada, we have the Fisheries Act, in the US, you have the Clean Water Act. That's how you protect fish habitat, bird habitat, wetlands. In Ontario, we have the Ontario Drinking Water Act, and it's a provincial legislation. And I was a council at Walkerton. That's where I learned out how we learned to protect drinking water. And when it came to rec water, it was the public health regulations and risk assessments and the local, provincial, and state laws that really protected access to water. And learning all of that, about swimmable, drinkable, fishable, the myriad of and the complexities of the laws and policies, it was so much easier to talk to people about swimmable, drinkable, fishable water, like the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement did, and to really try and let everybody connect. I think sometimes the most important thing I do as an environmental lawyer is get someone to go swimming in the lake for the first time. I never stop hearing about it after. I lived here my whole life and never once went down to the lake. And after that, they're at every meeting. They're supporting us through donations. They're studying. They get involved in other issues. they build a community, and they really become Great Lakes protectors and lovers. And I'm hopeful that in the next 50 years that particularly through the arts, particularly through the heart, particularly through connections with the water, paddling, swimming, fishing, diving, whatever it is that you love to do on the Great Lakes, studying, that this is the way to truly, inspire new muses, new arts, new poetry, new songs that are going to, for the first time, maybe talk about the Great Lakes. I know my friend Gord Downey in the Tragically Hip, really became known in Canada as a poet, but he talked about places he knew, places he loved, Lake Ontario, Kingston, the Great Lakes, the rivers across Canada, the people across Canada. And he really, and he built such strong ties to so many people in the country who are still working on water issues now because of Gord's, thinking it was important to Gord, it must be important to me. And I think, when we talk about the Great Lakes as a Rust Belt, I hate hearing that. I hate hearing, that the Canadian federal budget just, for fresh water, there's 8 regions and Great Lakes is one. You think the Great Lakes, the greatest freshwater ecosystem in the world during the UN decade of ecosystems that are necessary to prevent, halt, and restore ecosystems around the world in order to meet any of the sustainable development goals of the UN, you think the Great Lakes would get its due, particularly on the 50th anniversary of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And I feel like, we need more excitement, more people. And if we're going to help open that door and get more people in, it's through the arts and the artists. And I really hope to see that at the Great Lakes Public Forum. I know I was to talk about our project that's coming out, the Great Lakes Public Forum with CanGeo. It is very much a collaboration with artists, storytellers, using technology, AR, to tell stories in different ways and tell stories about different people and different things they do on the Great Lakes. And not just the old, the old stories. We need our new stories that connect people to the Great Lakes and ultimately inspire them to become the protectors of the future. So I'm glad everyone, I don't know if that fit in today's talk, but I'm glad for the chance to speak to everyone. And I'm really excited to meet all of you who work so hard for fresh water in the Great Lakes.
Well, I'd like to kind of close everything up. Thank you, Mark, and I would like to thank all the participants from today's webinar. I just want to close out by stating I'm an educator, and I think that the destiny in the Great Lakes rests with our youth. And so much of the education in the United States of America is test-oriented. It has no relationship to place and the effectiveness the Great Lakes can have on our communities. I see photographers, writers, a spectrum of folk working with our youth, creating mentoring projects that will lead to the next 50 years. I'd even like to see a science fiction initiative where we have youth working with folks who are aware of a lot of these issues they've lived their lives through to come up with creative writing through the fiction elements. But I do want to say that we as an entity is like every other out there, frail, and we're looking for folks that can help us to give direction. And we welcome what you are doing, Mark, is specifically, and we hope we can do everything to support you in your efforts with the 50th anniversary. But I do want to kind of close out by saying again, thank you very much for everyone being participating in this. It is recorded. Let's look at this as part of a new beginning, not just one webinar addressing the 50th anniversary. Let's look towards the generation for 2072. And I want to thank everybody again and have a great afternoon.